Welcome to Linker Lures. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I designed a crankbait, 3D printed it, and the finishing steps to turn it into an actual lure. Then at the end, we're going to fish with it and see if we can actually catch anything. So step one was designing it in Blender. Blender is a free program used for all sorts of things, but I'm using it right now to make the 3D model of the lure. All I did was start with a simple cylinder and I adjusted it and scaled it so the dimensions are what I wanted. Then I just scaled down the end of the cylinder to make the tail. The next step was to bevel the front and the rear of the lure so it's actually the shape of what we want. After we get the front and back shaped how we want, we're going to add a curve to the bait so that it has an arching shape typical to most crankbaits. Now that we have the curve of the lure set, we're going to pocket the lure for the eye hooks and lip. All I used to pocket the lure for the eye hooks was another cylinder that I scaled to the proper dimensions. I made 3 pockets in total, 1 for the line tie and 2 for the hook hangers. Once I got those done, I used a cube to pocket a hole for the lip, and that was it for the design of the lure. In order to 3D print the lure, we have to slice the model. The slicer program is going to slice the model up into a bunch of layers, and it's going to tell the printer how to stack them all up. So the material I used to print the lure was PLA. It's probably the most common type of plastic used for desktop 3D printing, and I chose white because it's going to give us a nice canvas for when we paint it later. After it's done printing, we just have to break off the support material. I set the support density lower than I probably should have, and the bottom of the lure came out a little more rough than I hoped it would, but that was my fault because of the print settings. But it's nothing that sanding won't take care of later. I just used 220 grit sandpaper to sand the whole thing down. I actually ended up having to fill in the bottom with super glue because it was more rough than I could sand down, so I just filled in the gaps with super glue, sprayed it with some accelerator, and sanding continued. So I made the lip out of this really thin plastic sheeting I got, but it ended up being so wimpy that I ditched it and just filled in the slot for the lip with some super glue. It just wasn't going to hold and I just had no confidence in it, so I just ditched the whole thing. After the sanding was all done, I screwed in the eye hooks with a little super glue dabbed on them, just put a little on the threads, and it was good enough to hold it. I did some pull-out tests before this to see how it would hold, and they stayed in very well, so I had faith that these were going to stay put. I don't have an airbrush, so I just had to paint the lure with some acrylic paint by hand. I wanted to go for a crawdad imitation, so I painted it dark red with black banding. It looks more brown than red in the video, but I assure you it's red. I dotted black spots for the eyes, and then I spotted that with some silver. And then in the end I looked at it and it looked like Deadpool. That was totally by accident, not on purpose. After the painting was finished, I clear coated the lure and it was time for the line ties and hooks. Once it was completed, it was time to actually take the lure out and try to catch a fish with it. I was happy with the action. It had a nice wiggle on retrieval and would dive during fast retrievals. Then the lure would just surface if you paused. But sadly, after about 3.5 hours of fishing at a couple different locations, I came up empty-handed. I could blame it on the time of year with the cold water temps and the lure just not diving deep enough with a slow retrieval to attract bass, but I could just suck at fishing too, who knows. But I tried and tried and tried and tried. Just came up empty-handed. I'll revisit this lure in a future video, but I just had to call it quits and move on to the next one.